And just like that, we are at week 18, close to the end. We're going to week 20. So we're going to talk about chapter 17 and 18 tonight. So we're going to see obviously, we're going to see some things happening here because there's a lot going on. We have got Babylon. John breaks these last six chapters, into three parts. So that is a typo on the slide. Just ignore that and imagine it says three parts to these last six chapters, because that's what happens. We have a glorious angel who shows John a city that is represented as a woman, right? Babylon, that's utterly destroyed. We have four visions of God conquering his enemies, judging the dead, renewing creation, establishing the new Jerusalem. Then we're going to see another glorious angel showing John another city represented by a woman, just like we're going to talk about today. But this city, this woman, is the new Jerusalem, the bride of the Lamb. Now, up to this point, we know there's a relationship between the woman, between Babylon and the two beasts, but we're not really sure what that relationship is until now. When we see the image of the great harlot, she is leading people astray into idolatry. So she's kind of like that second beast that's leading people to the first beast, right? That's like, look at the shiny thing over here. And he's the false prophet going to that beast. Now we have Babylon, the image of this great harlot, leading people astray into idolatry, and their relationship is more clear. We can think of Babylon as a depiction of Rome. Of course, we know that there are many layers to what Babylon is. One of them is certainly possibly a depiction of Rome. We see its punishment. We see its connection with the beast. We see that Babylon is a symbol of absolutist power, right? Remember, the emperors were the absolute rulers. They were gods walking on earth. And this is what we really see in Babylon. And then in a surprise twist, spoiler alert, God is going to use evil to fight evil, which is going to be great. When we say, why does evil exist in the world? And does God really use bad for good outcome? Yes, we're going to see it. Evil fighting evil. Then we're going to read in chapter 18. It's a poem. It's a big, giant poem about the fall of Babylon / Rome. And the perspective is prophetic, as if this fall of Rome, this fall of Babylon, has already taken place. The imagery here, just like the rest of the whole book, think of the whole book of Revelation, it's not literal. It's not meant to be taken literal. And the imagery and what we read here is the same thing. It's not meant to be taken literally. The language is harsh. It's pretty vindictive. It's borrowed for sure from the Old Testament, right? You think of like the prophets in the Old Testament. Sometimes they were just really scathing and in their prophecies against cities like Babylon, like Tyre, like Nineveh, right? Not going to Nineveh. So we find this in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And that sort of strong, scathing language is meant to portray the unceasing demands of God's holiness and God's justice. Because remember, at the core of this, John is trying to pump up his churches. He's really trying to encourage the people. But it's hard to be a Christian. It's hard to be a Christian in modern day. It's hard to be a Christian in John's day. It's countercultural. It's much easier to go with the flow. So very countercultural. And this scathing language is meant to, as weird as it sounds, pick the people up and encourage them. So we'll jump right in. I'm going to read chapter 17. Babylon the Great. Then one of the 7 angels who were holding the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come here, I will show you the judgment on the great harlot who lives near the many waters. The kings of the earth have had intercourse with her, and the inhabitants of the earth became drunk on the wine of her harlotry." Then he carried me away in spirit to a deserted place where I saw a woman seated on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names, with 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was wearing purple and scarlet and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held in her hand a gold cup that was filled with the abominable and sordid deeds of her harlotry. On her forehead was written a name, which is a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk on the blood of the holy ones and on the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly amazed. The angel said to me, "Why are you amazed? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw existed once, but now exists no longer. It will come up from the abyss and is headed for destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, shall be amazed when they see the beast, because it existed once, but exists no longer, and yet it will come again." Here is a clue for one who has wisdom. The 7 heads represent 7 hills upon which the woman sits. They also represent 7 kings. 5 have already fallen, 1 still lives, and the last has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain only a short while. The beast that existed once, but exists no longer, is an 8th king, but really belongs to the 7 and is headed for destruction. The 10 horns that you saw represent 10 kings who have not yet been crowned. They will receive royal authority along with the beast for 1 hour. They are of one mind and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will fight with the Lamb, but the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Then he said to me, "The waters that you saw where the harlot lives represent large numbers of peoples, nations, and tongues. The 10 horns that you saw and the beast will hate the harlot. They will leave her desolate and naked. They will eat her flesh and consume her with fire. For God has put it into their minds to carry out his purpose and to make them come to an agreement to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are accomplished. The woman whom you saw represents the great city that has sovereignty over the kings of the earth."
After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice, he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The king of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries." Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit enthroned as queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn. Therefore, in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. When the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, Woe, woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon. In 1 hour your doom has come. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. Cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, of wine and oil, of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and human beings sold as slaves.
The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all who were slain on the earth.
Whew, that is pretty harsh. And there it is, Babylon the Great. Again, this is the symbolic name of Rome, right? Graphically, very graphically described as the great harlot, of course. This Babylon is actually, as we know, the first major city in the Old Testament that was typed in this way, in this way of harlotry. So the first typology of a foreign power that was hostile to God and to God's people was Babylon. And so that's where all of this is rooted. So of course, in John's time, immediately, harlot, Babylon, like a foreign power that's hostile to God, Babylon, no question. The part about the many waters it means a couple things. Babylon was famously located on the Euphrates River, and they were really well known. I mean, they're the cradle of civilization, right? Really well known for being able to irrigate. They're among the first to irrigate. They have extensive canals of irrigation, which actually let them settle and become a great city, right? They didn't have to be nomads anymore because they could control the water and they could grow crops, and then they didn't have to move around. Too much information. That was a bit of a tangent. We don't have time for tangents tonight. We got a lot to cover. Okay, intercourse, harlotry, fornication, all that good stuff. We think about the book of Isaiah. Isaiah's number one complaint: don't make agreements with foreign powers. Isaiah, I mean, if you take nothing else from the book of Isaiah, he was adamant. You trust in God. You don't trust in foreign powers. There's no need for that. And so there's absolutely this link of alliance with a foreign power equated with prostitution, with infidelity, idolatry, also in the same way, because if you're worshiping another idol, you're not worshiping God, you're not being true to God. The pagan capital cities of that time frequently would enter into corrupt political or corrupt financial relationships. And that was just common knowledge. That's just the way it was done. There was no gentleman's agreement. So this absolutely is a fornication. And this in John's time, they would have known Babylon is a, pagan foreign power that is mean to God's people. The pagan kings of the earth who've had intercourse with her. So this could be, if we again look at this as Rome, there were a lot of different pagan kings and even Jewish kings who were subject to Rome. We think of King Herod, right? He was Jewish, subject to the Roman authority, subject to Roman power, not trusting in God. And then the inhabitants of the earth becoming drunk on the wine of her harlotry. People like stuff. People like stuff today. They like stuff back then too. And so this foreign power, Rome, had a lot of stuff, right? A lot of luxuries, a lot of really comfortable living, material goods. And so if you're in a relationship with the harlot, with Rome, you get a lot of good stuff. So the people are just intoxicated by all the stuff. Does that sound familiar at all? Because it sounds really familiar to me, super convicting. So the woman is completely contrasted with the woman from chapter 12, who was clothed in the sun, right? We see how this woman is clothed. We see what she is doing, that she is seated on a scarlet beast. She's in a deserted place. She's in the wilderness. It's interesting that she is sitting on the beast, because that shows us that she is superior to the beast, but she's also dependent on the beast. She can't move without the beast. She has to ride him, but she rides him. So it's an interesting relationship that we see. Her cup was filled with her sordid deeds. And that sounds a lot like the bowls, the 7 bowls, right? And remember, in the Greek, bowl is probably not the most appropriate translation. It's probably more like a chalice. So if we know that Greek word, that chalice, was full of the sordid deeds, and we see the woman, that she had a cup that was filled with her sordid deeds, we make that connection to the bowls. And that word for abomination in Greek, akarthara, which is liturgical language only used for something that was ritually unclean or ritually impure. So this abomination is linked with ritual, with liturgy, because remember, this above all it's a book from John to pump up his people. It's also a book about liturgy. We know right from the start, why do we know in our heart of hearts that nothing in this book is literal, that it's all symbolic, there's so much symbolism? Why do we know that? Because John tells us written on her forehead, which is a mystery. He's telling us this is a mystery. This is symbolic. What you're reading is symbolic. It's not literal. There's not a woman riding on a red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. It's symbolism. In 17:6, chapter 6, I saw that the woman was drunk on the blood of the holy ones and on the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. Again, great wealth, idolatrous cults in Rome, and horrendous crimes. We talked about this before. We talked about how Nero would like put people on posts and light them on fire to make torches at night. People were covered with animal hides and then attacked by dogs. They're horrendous crimes. And these are what was recorded by a Roman historian, Tacitus. He has left for us a treasure trove of the horrific things that the Romans would do to each other. So not only is Babylon, the woman, guilty of murdering these holy ones, but she's guilty of idolatry, immorality, sacrilege, all of that. Now, the beast, remember, represents political power that's opposed to Christ and the church. The whore represents the socioeconomic, the cultural corruption that exists, the rebelling against God, and not necessarily only God, the person of God, but also God's law, which is written in creation, right? So the people are rebelling against following God's law of creation, which is to take care of each other, to love each other. And the people are rebelling against that. So they might not be saying, I'm rebelling against God. But if they're not taking care of their neighbor, they're rebelling against God. And so this is what the whore of Babylon represents. And of course, the woman in chapter 12 is the bride of the Lamb. So these are our main representatives here. Now, why is she depicted as a whore? It's shocking. It's shocking today to that word, right? It's a really strong word, harlot or whore. It's very strong. It has a lot of meaning, even today. It shocks us. This is meant to shock us. It shocked the Christians 2,000 years ago. It shocks us today. It should shock us into reevaluating our place in this very pervasive materialistic culture. So when we look at our lives, we illuminate our lives, right, with the light of the gospel. What do we see? Do we see like the tacky, gaudy outline of the whore of Babylon? When we shine that light on us, we've got to separate ourselves from her. We've got to separate ourselves from that socioeconomic and cultural corruption that is absolutely pervasive. This is so great because the angel says, why are you amazed? I'll explain it to you. And you're thinking, awesome. Finally, we are going to get some answers. We do not get any answers. We get even more confused. It just becomes more cryptic, more layers are revealed. And part of this I was interested to find is because all apocalyptic texts of this time were written in code or written in very cryptic ways to protect the writer from being searched for and possibly attacked. I guess that would happen. They would be like, prophesy, what's going to happen to me? You know, if you know this apocalyptic stuff, like what's my end? And they would find them and track them down and attack them sometimes. So it made me think of like Salman Rushdie, how for so long he was, you know, kind of on the run, kind of hiding. So apocalyptic text is not ever going to illuminate anything within the text. Now, existed once, but now exists no longer, yet will come again, was and is not. These all contrast with God, whom we met in chapter 1, who is and who was and who is to come. So instead of that very solid, comforting image of God, we've got existed once, no longer, is going to come again. I don't know, look out. So the beast, remember, was mortally wounded. And when we first met the beast, he had a mortal wound on one of his heads. So that means he was dead at some point. But then he was healed because he was not dead. This is also maybe an allusion to the belief that Nero would return as the head of the Parthians. You guys remember the Parthians who were on that eastern border? I mean, this is a real thing that happened, and they were constantly like poking at Rome, throwing rocks at the angry bear and constantly skirmishing. So there was a belief that Nero would be dead, would return from the dead as the head of the Parthians to avenge himself on his Roman enemies. Maybe, who knows? More probably, though, this whole idea that the beast existed and was no longer and is coming again means that while the beast lost the war with God, the beast will return to battle with the Christians, which we see today. We're still battling the beast today. Also, don't forget, this is recapitulative storytelling. We know we've heard this story before. We know this story. Remember, we're just looping around. It's the same story. The ultimate fate of the beast, though, of course, in the darkness was foreshadowed by the darkness of that fifth bowl that was poured out on the throne of the beast in the last chapter. Here's a clue. Literally, hear a mind that has wisdom. The reader has to look deeper into what John has written to figure out the truth, the concealed meaning. This is not literal. We have to have wisdom and we have to dig in to figure it out. The woman on the 7 hills, there was actually a coin circulating in Rome at the time of the goddess Roma sitting on 7 hills. So is this Rome? Is Babylon Rome? On one layer, most likely, yes. Then we start with the angels' whole thing with the different kings and the emperors and all of that. Scholars cannot absolutely agree on the identity of these Roman emperors. But the number 7, that there are 7 emperors, suggests that John meant all of them, all the emperors. They all demanded cults of emperor worship, right? They all believe themselves to be God. One theory that a lot of scholars believe is that the 7 kings, the 7 emperors, are Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Vespasian, Titus, Domitian, Nerva. An 8th king really belongs to the 7 because he's just as wicked as the rest of them. 10 we know is a number of completeness. John always pairs 10 and 7 with regard to the beast. So 10 and 7, it is completely evil. It is all the evil. The 10 kings who've not been crowned, who the heck are they? Perhaps they're Parthian sort of junior kings who are supposed to come in with Nero, right, in his march on Rome to regain power, maybe. They could also be the kings that Rome established on their different lands, like King Herod in Jerusalem, all subject to the emperor all the time. But we notice here, the reign of the beast is only 1 hour, which is a very stark contrast to before, when the beast was torturing the woman in chapter 12. He tortured her tried to torture her, chased her around for 3.5 years. And remember, at the temple, 3.5 years. So we've had this time of torment before. Now we see only 1 hour, very short time. It's a blink of an eye before God's going to come in and squash. The great humility of the Lamb stands in very stark contrast to these emperors, because God is the true king. Charity, mercy, kindness surpass anything mankind can think of. And never will any man, remember, Jesus is fully human, 100% human, never any man is universally loved as Jesus, universally. Here's our twist, right? This is such a great twist. The 10 horns, those 10 pagan kings, are going to unwittingly fulfill God's will. They're going to do God's will. They're going to deliver God's justice against that harlot in Rome. Ezekiel 16:37. So this is back in Ezekiel wrote, "Therefore, I will now gather together all your lovers with whom you found pleasure, both those you loved and those you hated. I will gather them against you from all sides and expose you naked for them to see." Here we go. That's exactly what they're going to do to her. They're going to leave her desolate and naked, right? John's people would have known Ezekiel. Ezekiel's prophecy was because right before the Babylonian exile, Judah had been making alliances with pagan nations. And Ezekiel was prophesying, and he was saying, destruction of Jerusalem, Babylon is coming in to take over. Those who serve the beast have this absolutist view of political power. No one can question the authority of the emperor. No one. This is the opposite of God offering all humans free will. There is no free will with the beast. There is no free will in Rome with an emperor. There's no free will with the harlot. But the twist, we see God using his evil forces to deliver his justice. All things are possible with God. All right, chapter 18. This is this whole story of the fall of Babylon. Very similar, like we've said before, to many Old Testament prophecies about the downfall of different cities. First, in the Old Testament, what happens? The fall is proclaimed. The prophet says, this city is going to fall. God's people are told to escape the punishment. Then in the Old Testament, third, we have the lament of kings and merchants. And then fourth, we have the joy of those who were suffering and who now see justice. That is what we got in the Old Testament. This is what we are getting here. A lot of sins in Rome. Among them, though, is this idea that unbridled indulgence leads to the degradation of society. You start looking at people as objects for your personal pleasure. This is really what John's, probably this is the biggest complaint, right? This is the overarching complaint. This is how we got here. Degradation of society comes from indulgence of our every desire. Consumerism in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's not evil, right? We all have to buy stuff. That's not evil. It's the feverish pursuit of material possessions, when that is what is driving you, that keeps you from turning to the eternal things that actually matter. And in Babylon, did you notice it was so bad, even the demons probably would not want to live there, but they don't have a choice because they're in cages. So that's pretty bad, I think, when even the demons have to be trapped in cages to make them stay. So depart from her, my people. Not necessarily an evacuation, more a separation. This is very common in apocalyptic literature in particular. Jeremiah 51:6 said, "Flee from Babylon, each of you, save your own life. Do not perish because of her guilt." This is a time of retribution from the Lord. So here we are. John says, a voice from heaven, "Go, my people, so that you don't take part in her sins and have to deal with her punishment." Very similar to Lot fleeing Sodom, right? He had guests that came and told Lot, "You need to go." Sin piled up to the sky. That's such a visual image. So sin is grave because it offends God, right? Because of that, sin is linked, and God is, let me say this, God is linked to greatness, a sense of greatness and goodness, right? We think of that with God. Present, that is present in man's relationship with his creator. We have a sense of God as a father. If we lose that sense of God, if we lose that sense of the greatness and goodness of God, and we lose that sense of God as Father, we lose the sense of sin. We forget what is sinful if we don't know what is good. If we don't have a sense for what is truly good, then we don't have a sense for what is bad either. Double her deeds. Whew, not literal, remember, but we get the idea for sure that the punishment is really severe. To the measure of her boasting and wantonness. So she says, "I've been thrown as a queen. I'm not going to feel bad, whatever." This is straight out of Isaiah 47. Think about what John says, the Babylon says here. "I shall remain always a sovereign mistress forever. You did not take these things to heart, but disregarded their outcome. Now hear this, voluptuous one, enthroned securely, saying in your heart, I and no one else. I shall never be a widow, bereft of my children. Both these things shall come to you suddenly in a single day. Complete bereavement and widowhood shall come upon you, despite your many sorceries and the full power of your spells. Secure in your wickedness, you said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and your knowledge led you astray, and you said in your heart, I and no one else, but upon you shall come an evil you will not be able to charm away. Upon you shall fall a disaster you cannot ward off. Upon you shall suddenly come a ruin you cannot imagine." So straight from Isaiah, this imagery, straight from Isaiah. The kings of the earth had intercourse with her in their wantonness. This is very similar to Ezekiel 26:27, prophesying about the fall of the city of Tyre. In that case, both Babylon and Tyre, from Ezekiel, they have the lament of the kings, merchants, and sailors as well. So John's people, when they saw that it was kings, merchants, sailors, they would have gone back to Tyre and to Ezekiel prophesying about that. Now, the way that the words are written, the punishment is both coming and it's already executed at the same time. So this is the apocalyptic literature, right? It's cryptic, it's confusing, and it's recapitulative storytelling. It happened, it's going to happen. Intercourse, fornication, all of that, of course, not literally, but definitely engaged in illicit acts. Now we go to the merchants. So the kings, the merchants, the sailors. The merchants lament what is happening in the present time. They don't care at all about Babylon or Rome, that she is going to be killed. They don't care a bit. What do they care about? Their markets are lost. That's what they care about. They don't care about her. They just care about her stuff and the people that would buy the stuff. Verse 13 about the sheep, the horses, the chariots, and the slaves, that is the human beings. Christian abolitionists actually would turn to that verse frequently when they were trying to convince people that slavery was wrong here in the US back in the day. At this time, 2,000 years ago, the slave trade was huge in Asia in particular. They would get all kinds of slaves out of Asia and sell them in the markets. So that was really, that really would have been in the face of the people of John's time. Absolutely. The sailors, they lament the past, right? Note that Babylon is not associated with a false religion like that second beast. That second beast, who was a false prophet. Babylon, though, and that second beast was affiliated with the political machinations, right? So Babylon's associated again with that socioeconomic system that causes people to behave dishonestly through greed. So that's really where Babylon is. Babylon is a symbol, and that means it's a symbol. It's not limited to a specific time or a specific place. Babylon is today. Babylon was in 586 BC, squashing Jerusalem. Babylon was Rome in 70 AD. Babylon is a symbol, not limited. Last slide, we're going to make it. Okay, I know I really have rushed through this, but we needed to get through it. All right, so note that there's a big contrast. We have got death, destruction, right? Babylon, the whore of Babylon has been stripped naked and eaten and caught on fire and just terrible things. Verse 20, rejoice over her. Heaven rejoices over the delivery of justice and over the end to an evil kingdom, but not over the death of the people who failed to repent. So that's really important. And it brings me to mind of the Passover cup. And now I cannot remember which cup it is. I think it is the second cup during the Seder meal, when the folks who participate in the meal would take out the drips of wine from the cup as a representation of the Egyptians who lost their lives when the Israelites fled from Egypt. They do not celebrate the death of the Egyptians. They're not celebrating that. They are celebrating delivery from enslavement. They're celebrating God's justice. They're not celebrating the death of individual people ever. The millstone, echoes of Jeremiah 51. So a millstone was connected to like a prophetic action. So Jeremiah, he wrote a prophecy. He wrote it about the fall of Babylon. He wrote it on a scroll. He had it tied to a millstone and then tossed into the Euphrates. And the idea behind that is that Babylon would sink in the same way that millstone did. Luke chapter 17, verse 2. Better to have a millstone tied around your neck and be thrown into the sea than to cause someone else to sin. So we've got this definite link with millstones. The darkness and the silence are described in this poem in great detail, right? It is eerie, It is creepy to be in a giant deserted city. It's like a tomb. It's like the inside of a tomb. It is death. To the city of blood, Ezekiel 24:6. Jerusalem was called a city of blood. So back to Ezekiel. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus is condemning the actions of the scribes and the Pharisees. And he is saying to them, you have murdered the prophets and the messengers of God. And all that blood is going to come back upon you. So verse 24, in her was found the blood, the prophets and the holy ones, and all who have been slain on the earth. This is the blood that's coming back. So it is not good for Jerusalem or for Babylon. Definitely not good. Not good. Not good at all. And there we are. It's going to get better, though. It's going to get better for everybody. All right. Any thoughts, questions, any weirdnesses? It's all kind of weird, but
It's just interesting how, throughout the presentation tonight, just going through the scripture, that there's references and, Ezekiel or Isaiah, and it's just starting to make me, Jeremiah, yeah, to this sort of cyclical, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting that we see these references and in the end that we've heard before. And so I guess I'm just wondering, how the Bible was put together, if those that sort of pieced it together were thinking about that, fine thread that kind of weaves through the way, you've pointed it out to us.
so I would
Intentional, or
yes, I would say that the folks who are divinely inspired to write the New Testament books, those folks knew the Old Testament. So they couldn't help but find those connections. They, even if they weren't trying, they couldn't help. Today in modern times, if we see someone, if I say they're acting like Hitler, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you would have been like, yes, that's what I thought too. I thought the Rwandan genocide, right? You're like, oh my gosh, that is like Nazi Germany action happening. So that is just, we didn't even have to dig for that. That just immediately springs to mind. So for those folks writing the New Testament books, yeah, those connections for them were crystal clear. And they couldn't help but include them to help make sure that people understood where they were coming from and to help people see those connections. As far as how all that stuff got put together in the Bible, there are a lot of gospels out there. A lot of gospels. There are not a lot of gospels that are considered sacred scripture. And for the most part, it was kind of a staying power kind of a thing, right? What are the ones that everybody universally read? What are the ones that everybody just knew? Oh yeah, this is it. This is divinely inspired. And it was absolutely a collection. Saint Jerome, yes, is credited with actually putting those books together, but he didn't make those decisions by himself, right? It's because he had all of this. And the canon, the Muratorian, something like that canon. The first time New Testament books were written in a list is from like the 2nd century. And St. Jerome didn't put the Bible together till the 4th century, like actually put it all together. So from as early as the 2nd century, there was a list of these are accepted books.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the books that made the cut for the Bible.
Yep.
Mark, Luke, and John, the letters of St. Paul,
Acts.
Revelation, Acts of the Apostles. Okay. Did all those authors, were they all Jewish? I mean, because I get that, like, if they're speaking to a Jewish audience, the Jewish people would know the scriptures, but were pagans familiar with the scriptures, like Old Testament?
Such a great question. They were all Jewish.
All the writers.
All the writers. Salvation is from the Jews.
Was Paul?
Mm-hmm. Remember Paul?
He was like, he had the whole conversion. But he still was Jewish.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And he was taught by the famous rabbi Gamaliel, right? I mean, Paul was on his way to becoming a rabbi.
Right.
Sure. And they were all Jewish. Yes.
Okay.
And so they would have known, but they were not all writing to Jewish. Their audience was not all Jewish. And
pagans weren't as familiar with the Old Testament as Jewish people were, though, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And so they would have had to explain those things to them for sure and bring out all those books, right? Which is why our canon is Old Testament and New Testament.
Right.
Because it's the whole thing. It's all the things. But that is a really great question about the authors, for sure. But it was to their audience. So what audience are you writing to? So depending on who their audience was, some of the Gospels really stress the Old Testament connection, and some don't. And that's why, because their audience was not as familiar.
Right.
Or Babylon. From here on out, it's like good. It's not all death and destruction. And it's going to be good. Because we know the ending. Because we knew the ending, like chapter 1, verse 1, we knew the ending. But we got to get through the yucky. Yeah. All right. Any other things? I cannot believe that we did that in an hour. Go us. We rock. Okay, cool. Well, you all have a great evening, and we'll see you next week for Victory.
Thank you, Erin.
Yep. All right. Take care.
Bye.